Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think most of the people who intended to come to this session are already here. My name is Joshua Bamfield. I'm chairing this session, and also I'm the first speaker. So I've decided not to give you a chairman's introduction because I've not prepared one. I thought I'd just go into my presentation and get that out of the way. Obviously, this session is about strategy and it's about people as well. Strategy is seen as increasingly important these days. It's important, obviously, because strategy within the business is the way in which loss prevention people can put their ideas across to other members of the organisation. But strategy is increasingly seen as something that involves other retailers, other organisations like the police, the Home Office, the members of the criminal justice system and so on. Just to introduce myself, some of you know me, and I've produced a book, and I will mention it, but not too often. I read philosophy, politics and economics at university in Oxford, and was president of the Oxford Union there, which means that I've got the same sort of background, except for the fact I haven't got as the members of the current cabinet, except that obviously I'm not a millionaire and I don't benefit from the reduction in income tax, which is all very, 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 very useful. My work in the retail industry, I worked for the Co-op for a number of years. I've been a director of a couple of cooperative societies. I've done a lot of research as an economist into retail productivity, and I can bore you to death for hour after hour on the sorts of things we found, and the relationship between large stores, large organisations, and worker productivity. When I became responsible for the MBA at Oxford Brookes University, I took a much greater interest in strategy and in teaching management and in teaching strategy, because many of us got really quite fed up with economics at that time and saw it as really going down a sort of little track. So, if you like, I combined in myself both the idea that retailers should be efficient and also retailers should be interested in strategy. In our business, which is the Centre for Retail Research, we, I suppose, are best known for the work on crime, which has been going on since 1986. But in fact, the vast majority of the work we do is about the retail sector, about things like the trends in online retailing, government economic policy, jobbing work. We're just publishing something on the impact of the Olympics, exciting, on retailers, and the impact of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. I'm sure that will go well, but that is actually means more to us in terms of revenue than crime. So we do these two things, but the people who are interested in, if you like, retail marketing don't know about the work we do in crime, and the people who are interested in crime don't know or are not interested in the work we do in retail marketing. It's a bit like having two wives without this sexual excitement that they would provide. Right, okay. So let's get on with it. Criminomics. Criminomics is a word that I invented. I'm not saying that you're not doing criminomics. I'm saying you are doing criminomics. But here is a name. Here is a name for it. I'll stop stammering in a moment. Criminomics is the study of business crime as if the victims and not the perpetrators actually mattered. Criminomics is about how retailers fight crime, taking into account the financial costs and the opportunity costs. In other words, what you lose, what you're not doing because you're tracking down on crime and other sources of loss. And criminomics is about getting the maximum benefit from loss prevention spending, deterring offenders, apprehending malefactors, and increasing the risks and costs of offending. Now, I love criminomics and I love criminologists, though I'm not married to any of them, I have to say. And it's the tendency when looking at retail crime is to say, well, what has criminology got to say? Because obviously that's got crime in its title. if you look at something like the Oxford Handbook of Criminology, you know, from a really top-notch university, almost as good as Cambridge, this is a book which is prepared by some of the most important professors in the world on this topic of criminology. It's got 1,800 pages, so it's even longer than my book. And retail crime is the biggest crime that there is in the UK and in most other countries. There are more offences, the amount stolen is more every year. And how many of these 1,680 pages in the Oxford Handbook of Criminology are devoted to retail crime? Well, I won't ask you that. I was going to ask you that and not allow you to go until somebody got the right answer. 3 pages relate to retail crime. So there's a bit of a disproportion in the importance of crime, the importance of retail crime, and the amount of attention it gets publicly from the Home Office, from the police, and from everywhere else. And criminology and criminomics is an attempt to say, well, in actual fact, this is a business issue. It's about economics and crime. It's not just about some academic or arbitrary study. So criminomics is what you're doing, but let's be open about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So there's the book. The agenda of my talk is that I'm going to talk about the business of retail crime. And it's a business for retailers as well as being a business for criminals. Why do people steal? Retail crime costs. Why is this issue always overlooked? And then to look a little at strategic loss prevention management. So crime is a business. The loss prevention manager has to understand 2 things. One is the changing environment that he or she faces, and the other, the customers. The environment is, of course, well known, economic, political, legal, social, changes in law and so on. And the customers are, first of all, the retailers who pays the money and asks for things to be done. And the other lot of customers are, of course, the criminals. Obviously, if there were no criminals, there would be no loss prevention managers, which is tough, but the likelihood of that occurring is so remote that we don't need to worry about it just yet. What does the retailer want? I'll look at criminals a little later, but what does the retailer want? The retailer obviously is looking for the protection of people, the protection of assets, and also the protection of reputation, the protection of the brand. And that's the role of the loss prevention manager. And I think there's a bit of a danger in the way in which loss prevention managers' jobs have become so extended. There's a danger of role drift as you get involved in health and safety, fire, car parking, all sorts of other issues. It's important, obviously, that we look very much at what's happening to shrinkage and crimes and how to protect people, assets, and the brand. So retail is looking for loss prevention, for clarity in objectives, for improving outturns. It doesn't need to be brilliant, as we know, but it needs to be better than it would otherwise have been. Wants to be warned about new trends. Like one of the new trends is obviously the way in which payment systems are changing, and that will inevitably produce loss prevention issues. And wants problems that occur are dealt with quickly. And so it's a matter of working your plan and planning your work. And so overall, the retailer is looking for loss prevention to produce a strategic approach, working with others, exchanging information, and so on. Now let's have a look at crime costs. Now I know that shrinkage is not the same as crime. I know that very much, but I just want to look at crime costs. According to our data last year, which is the Global Retail Theft Barometer, UK shrinkage losses were almost £5 billion, or 4,890 million pounds. And last year we reckoned that shrink was 1.37%, different I know from Fran at Martech, but nonetheless we're all trying to work in the same direction. Ours is a countrywide set of estimates, not the top 100. And last year it was 1.29%. So, we found a sharp rise in shrinkage 2011 compared to 2010. The totals and the subtotals of all those categories, shoplifting, for example, of 43.8%, employee theft, 36.1% of the total, are contingent, by which I mean they're simply the facts that people send them in, we add them up, and that's the answer. Now, it may be that the fact that people misjudge the figures, that they overstate shoplifting and understate employee theft. I'm quite happy to accept that. But we, or I, I'm not trying to sort of peddle the idea that all retail shrinkage is shoplifting, or all of it is employee theft, or all of it is administrative error. It's a mixture. And it's actually quite difficult to work it out. So when we look at employee theft, and I know lots of people say, this figure is too low. And I would probably agree with you. The figure is too low. It is more. There's always this emphasis not to overstate employee theft. But just look at that. The people who work for retailers are the most criminogenic workforce that there is in the country. They're low paid. There's a fast turnover. They don't stay very long in the job. Often they're doing the job until something, inverted commas, better comes up. Now, we all know what a great job working in retail is, but nonetheless, there's a proportion of people who stuff it as far as they're concerned. They're really not interested. So, criminogenic workforce. You would expect them to steal because they don't care and they're not interested in their long-term job. There's 2.9 million of them. If 5% steal £300 each on average, the total theft is 43 million or 44 million. And that figure there is obviously a great deal higher. That figure is more like the figure that the BRC produces every year with their estimates of retail crime. So if we say, well, no, it's that 5%, it's not stealing 300, but stealing £1,000 a year, even so, you've only got 145 million being produced. Now, I'm not arguing that this is overstating crime caused by malevolent employees. I'm just saying that when you work the figures through, there are lots of problems. I haven't got the answer. I'm just saying the data comes into us, we add them up, and we publish them. But we don't have any moral attachment to it being shoplifters or employees and so on. And we know what a small proportion of employee theft is actually tracked down. Now, we've got this figure of a very high shrinkage rate, higher than ever before. If we say, well, let's look at the total impact of retail crime upon the economy. And that grey figure on the right-hand side is theft from shops, goods and cash. If you look at the green on the top, that's the losses to the Inland Revenue, HMRC, sorry, I'm obviously out of date. Almost £915 million is lost in terms of excise tax, excise duties, corporation tax, and other taxes. That's more than enough to actually give jobs to all those policemen who are being sacked or being let go. That's almost 1,000 million. So that's the sort of the cost of retail crime that nobody does add up. And then there are other costs to retail crime caused by, let's say, the fact that people are injured, they have time off work, some of them never work again. Crime-related closure and disruption. There's a loss of indirect sales. If you don't have so many goods on the shelf because people have stolen them, then obviously you can't sell those goods. And we put that down as £195 million in marketing losses, but many other marketers would come up and say, in actual fact, it's 3 or 4 times that. It's more like 500 million. So when you work through the figures of the cost of the criminal justice system, the cost of the courts, the cost of the police, the cost of people administering community sentences, you come up with a total of £6,743 million. That's the cost of retail crime. And we haven't done this in an exaggerated way. We've tended to take the lowest cost. Another person doing it might well come out and say, well, it's 8,000 million. Fine. All we're saying is that the losses caused to the community by retail crime aren't simply the losses caused to retailers. One can add another 73% on top of that, which is the loss to society. Now, although retail crime has gone up in the last year, the UK record has been good. that's a figure from the Global Retail Theft Barometer for Europe, just to put everything in international context. In the early 2000s, the average UK shrinkage rate was above 1.7%. So it was really it was out here. So. Now it's just 0.02% higher, if we look at this figure for 2010, 1.29% was the UK figure. So in other words, retailers throughout Europe have reduced the average shrinkage rate as a percentage of sales over the last 10 years. It's gone up and down, but it's down. The second thing is that the UK has done better than average, and that's obviously because of the work of loss prevention in understanding the problem and getting to grips with it. We've done better than most of our European neighbours. It's not often you hear that from anybody at all. So the cost of retail crime is very high. No one's taking enough account of it, and no one's doing the looking at it from a societal or total economic point of view. Those policemen there are marching very smartly. Obviously, they're marching to the job centre. Let's have a look at offences and offenders. The number of thieves reported to the police range around 320,000, and when they're up by 5%, as they are in Nottingham, people say this is very bad, and when it's down by 5%, people say, isn't it terrific, the impact of the police. The reality is that it's always around about this sort of figure, which is suspicious, given that the BRC's figure relating to, 49% of retailers in the UK is over 500,000. So what happens to these people? Do they fall out of cars on their way to the police station, or what? I think most of you do know what happens, and so I won't explain it. The actual number of offenders is probably about 800,000 who are apprehended by retailers. And the number of offences of people who are not apprehended is at least 11 million. If you divide the average amount people steal into the total amount that is stolen, you get something like that, 11 million. Now, there are a number of Home Office researchers who produced that figure. The figure, though, is still too low, though it is a figure which you can defend in a variety of ways. It's still too low. The figure is somewhere between, as it says there, 11 million and 30 million. There's some Home Office researchers who've said it's 65 million offences every year, and that might well be true. And there are other more recent pieces of research that say, well, it's 25 million. In other words, this is a really big deal. This is the biggest crime that there is in the UK, and who cares? Retailers care. Domestic burglaries, 540,000. Theft from vehicles, 339,000. Violence against a person, 401,000. Robbery, 75,000. Murders, very, 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 very small. I'm not saying that these are unimportant. I'm merely saying that in the global impact compared to retail crime, they really are. They really are low. Sorry about that title at the top. That's a list. If you can see those figures, the figures you want to worry about, figures that are of interest are on the left-hand side. There, that gives you the year, and next, the number of shoplifters referred to the police. In 1935, the number of shoplifters referred to the police was 15,000, and this had gone up to, as we heard, 320,000 last year, but 307,000 in 2009 to 2010. Even in 1960, when people were already starting to have sex, as you know, there were only 41,000 shoplifters. And at the end of that giddy, exciting, tie-wearing decade, the 1960s, at the end of the 1960s, in 1970, in fact, it was only 101,000. So it's trebled since 1970. So even police own records show that this is a really, really big crime. And so what are people doing about it? So we move on to the criminal justice system. The first issue, of course, that a retailer faces is, well, I've arrested somebody, will the police come? A second problem relating to employee theft is what we in the Centre for Retail Research laughingly call the fraud donut. A donut, as you know, is a cake with a hole in the middle. If you've arrested somebody for stealing £20 from the till and you've got some evidence and they say, I'm very sorry, the police will handle that. If you say, I've got 3 people, this is a conspiracy, they've stolen £90,000, and I want you to take this case on and I want this to go to court. What they'll say probably is, this is not part of my job description. I think you need to talk to the detectives. And the detectives say, we can't handle this. Try the fraud squad. The fraud squad, as you know, will say, we don't handle anything unless it's £250,000. And in actual fact, we've already got 25 cases that we're not even able to open yet because we haven't finished the 50 cases we've already got in hand. So the fraud donut is a big problem, where people who are a bit selective and aggressive in their theft methods and work for you actually may well be excluded from the criminal justice system because it's nobody's job and nobody's competent to deal with those sorts of issues from the side of the criminal justice system. Those are the sorts of things that happen to most people who steal from shops and create the biggest crime problem that there is in the UK. As you see, not a lot. Very few people go to trial. Of those who go to trial, a rather larger proportion than was the case 10 years ago actually go to prison. But still, it's only about 50,000 go to prison. What's the average prison sentence? 4.3 months. So you're out after 8 or 9 weeks. And I don't think anybody really is saying we should go back to the Shoplifting Act of 1698, which said that if you steal more than 5 shillings, the capital punishment is the preferred sentence. Even the most aggressive of loss prevention managers would say that's going a little too far. Though on occasions it might be a good idea to show people what we're made of. What I think people want is some sort of consistency in this, where serious offenders are treated more severely than minor offenders, and where there's some sort of escalator or staircase, so that if you're a first-time offender and you're 17 and you've done something silly and you're very upset, etc., you might say, well, in actual fact, we don't see any point in this coming to court. You know, I'm not arguing in favour of that, but nonetheless you may say, we'd like you to concentrate on somebody who's been doing this for 2 or 3 years. We arrest them about 3 or 4 times a month. They've stolen this amount, and nobody seems to want to do anything about them. So some sort of escalator, so that if you start on the escalator or up the staircase, something will happen to you and it'll become more and more severe, rather than it being a matter of the discretion of the police who actually turn up, whether you get a penalty notice for disorder or whether you're taken back to the station or what. If people, why do people steal? They steal because it's easy. They steal because they can get away with it. They steal because they know that even if they're apprehended by retailers, probably nothing much will happen to them. And so it's, compared to, let's say, like being a burglar or a robber or a mugger, it's a much more successful and risk-free sort of environment. And then as the Home Office and the Crime Prosecution Service found, of course, 1/3 of all penalty notices for disorder were given incorrectly. So where do we go? The criminals and the cheats. First of all, it's important to accept, and I think we all do accept, that theft is often purely rational rather than being motivated by the fact that they're mad or they've got some sort of psychological problem. And I think it's important that also that we see shoplifting or staff theft as part of a spectrum of cheating, rather than just concentrating on the worst offenders and the most significant events. Just as Fran was talking about refund fraud, in the US, retailers there say they lose $13 billion a year through refund fraud. It's now 18% of total merchandise losses in the US. Why? Because it's easy to do. And because you can always say sorry. Neutralisation, the idea that, everybody's doing it, I'm a good customer here. They don't mind me stealing every so often, as long as I don't get too greedy. Those sorts of neutralization approaches often allow people to steal without guilt at all. They love the joy of shopping, so why not do it more cheaply when you need to? Retail shopping monsters, something people like Tesco, routinely attacked by the press as being over-profitable and really wicked. But many retailers, when the time is right, are attacked by the press. And that gives people a reason for saying, well, I stole from it, because why not? Who cares, they don't care. And so they give themselves permission to cheat and steal. So criminals and cheats. But neutralization also sets boundaries to theft. You don't, if you're neutralizing and you say, I don't want to conceive what I'm doing as theft, I'm merely simply doing what everybody else is doing, that means you're not going to become a street robber, which is good, but it means you stay in this sector of not stealing very much. From an economic point of view, economists these days have become very interested in how people decide they're going to buy things, and this idea of mental accounting, where people intellectually have got so little trays, if you like, in their mind, with that's for the holidays, that's for the family, that's for me, that's for eating at work, and so on. And the impact of mental accounting is that if you go into a shop and you see a nice set of lingerie, whether you're male or female, you may say, I'd like to buy that, it's really good. But I've already spent the money I was allocating to that last week. Therefore, therefore theft. You may well be able to afford it from an outside, a rational point of view, but because you allocate your funds in a particular way, you say, well, I can't afford it, therefore I'll steal it. And that's why it's so difficult to understand all this talk about celebrity shoplifting. The idea that celebrities steal and do things that are unethical or corrupt is not something I think that most loss prevention managers would find strange, even though it seems to be strange to journalists. But the people who are celebrities have often cheated a bit to succeed, or cheated a lot. They often have their own sort of lifestyle story where, of overcoming problems, so they're victims, and they owe it to themselves. In order to become a celebrity, they've probably taken massive risks, and shoplifting is just yet another one of those. They also despise people. They despise shop workers. They despise common, ordinary people who are not as wonderful as they are. Another reason for not bothering at all about their interests. They may have been a shoplifter when they were young, but never said anything about it. In other words, they've got those skills still, and they use them ever so often. And when they succeed, they say, isn't this great? I can get away with it. And they know that because they're famous and wonderful and got these great interpersonal skills, they're going to probably talk their way out of, or shout their way out of, any issue they have with a mere security guy or the branch manager. So it's not hard, I think, to understand celebrity shoplifting and why somebody who, let's say, earns £250,000 or £1 million a year might well still want to steal goods from Tesco. Now, retail nearness. This issue, which I think has been that retailers have not devoted a lot of attention to until relatively recently, is to do with, if you like, sort of common pilferage. And people may be more willing to go for petty offending. It may be that we're spending too much time on the sort of prolific offenders, and we ought to look a lot more at petty offending and petty near offending, because it seems less criminal, because it's easier to get away with it, and it may be just as lucrative. So when Smith and Harvey did a scoping study for a new study of retail crime, they got some information from the co-op, which was a lot of their stores suffered no crime whatsoever. Yet when they went back to these stores, they found there was widespread abuse, people were cheating. It was just that people weren't being arrested. There was a sort of a wicked customer base, but they weren't doing very severe things that made the shop workers think, oh, we've got to arrest these people and call the police. So even in the non-crime stores, there still was a heavy impact of crime. Now, this retail nearness model, which is there, is an escalator. At the top right-hand side are angels, people who actually go into shops, they pay for their goods, and if you give them too much change, they say, I'm sorry, we've made a mistake, here is that £1 back. At the bottom, obviously, there's devils, and they're the people who don't act on that basis. The purpose of that chart is just to show that there are a number of actions which are illegal, wrong, improper, but actually which are very near to shopping behaviour. And what I'm arguing is that it could well be 20 or 30 or 40% of your shoplifting may simply be this unethical behaviour. Retail wearing, refund fraud, shopping and stealing. You know, oh, I'm a good customer here, I've just spent 80 quid and I've not paid 4 or 5 quid's worth of it. Collusion, refund fraud, price switching. When I was running civil recovery, it was interesting that when people had switched prices, they often thought this was just a small item, a small matter. They didn't see it as a real crime. They didn't see it as theft. They just saw it as something that if they said they're sorry, you'd say, well, okay, let's not worry. In other words, entitlement. So the retail nearness model can be used for retail front, retail wearing, and shopping and steal. It's very much like normal shopping. And so to people who don't want to think of themselves as criminals, it's the sort of crime that they would do. Now, I'm running over time, so I just have to flick through this. Staff fraud, I've had a discussion about that. We've got a big database of staff fraud, and the only thing I want to talk about, looking at, 3,000 offenders, what did they steal, looking at their ages by gender, and so on. In the top left-hand corner of the yellow section, 45 people stole 35% of total losses from employee fraud. Now that to me suggests that if you can find another 5 or 6 people, you'd find a lot more employee theft. Now, no way am I suggesting the Walmart system will ignore very, very small offending and only concentrate on the big offending. But it could well be that the balance is wrong here and that more emphasis on the prolific offenders for staff thieves might produce better results. This is the shrink escalator. People always say, well, is crime shoplifting or is it employee crime? If you want a copy of this presentation, I'll be happy to send it to you. No doubt they'll put it up on the web. But this is a particularly important diagram simply because it maps average shrinkage in a country against the percentage of employee theft. And as you see, up the right-hand side, you've got people like the USA, South Africa, Argentina, Australia, and so on, with high shrinkage and high staff theft. And down the left-hand side, you've got people with low shrinkage and low staff theft. So it could well be that shoplifters steal a certain amount anyway. And if you've got big staff theft, this is an addition to the problem. So the argument we always have about staff versus customer theft may actually not be the right argument. So, loss prevention strategic plan. Retailers need to take a strategic view. There's no magic bullet. They need to monitor crime trends. They need to plan, lead and communicate. And they certainly need to talk about the successes and failures they're having. Loss prevention needs to be long-term rather than short-term, and it should be about raising the profile in the business. Criminomic strategy is where you link costs to benefits. There are dangers, I think, in having too many projects. That often means that they're not given the right amount of attention. I think loss prevention has got to be experimental and always doing new things. It's got to be about employee training and culture and also strategic partnerships. There are some emerging trends there, which we'll talk about many of them today. And obviously the loss prevention manager of the future has got to be on top of all those trends, in particular the trend in online losses. Recommendations. Retailers need a strategic view. One needs to think very much of raising the loss prevention profile within the business, and communication, leadership and planning is one way to do it. Watchful of new trends. trends in policing and the criminal justice system really mean that retailers have got to do this for themselves because they won't get a lot of help from the police, though one has heard very good things from the police in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Criminomics is about relating the costs of loss prevention to its results. Thanks very much. I would take questions at this stage, but as I've overrun, I shouldn't.